So I'm going to talk about today some sort of geological stories we propose from the northwestern part of the Himalaya. Particularly, I'm going to talk about a story, as you can see from this field photo. This is a small village in northwestern India, sitting about 3,800 meters high. It's called Hemis Shupichan. I'm going to talk about the rocks in around this village and talk about how we can learn about the history of the Himalaya in this segment by reading the geological record in these rocks. So just a little bit introduction about our group. We are Tectonics and Biostratigraphy Research Group. Really, we look at past and present convergent tectonic plate boundaries using a quite multidisciplinary approach. In the same group, we have sedimentologists, we have geomorphologists, we have geochronologists, we also have paleontologists focusing on micropaleontology. And we have a couple of PhD students and a bunch of honors students as well. At the moment, we're working on the modern example, India-Eurasia collision system, looking at the Himalayan Tibetan Plateau system. We're also working in Eastern Australia, looking at the ancient subduction boundary of the Gondwana. As Rick just mentioned, we just completed during COVID, COVID safe, of course, some field work in Northern Queensland. We also have active projects in New Caledonia and New Zealand as well. So today's story is about in Himalaya and Tibetan Plateau system. As many of you would know, that this system is referred as the Earth's third pole because it is very high, it covers a lot of area, its geological history really interact with the entire Earth system. The uplift of the plateau alters the atmospheric composition, affect our climate history, also such intensive geological process, continent collision, really lead to a lot of hazard and resource accumulation as well. So really a fascinating place to work in this area. So how did this system form? We know that India broke off from Australia during the Cretaceous, and it traveled through an ancient ocean called the New Tethys Ocean, all the way to the north. And eventually, India subcontinent collided with Eurasia around 35 million years ago. Its collision, of course, led to the uplift and formation and uplift of the Himalaya and Tibetan Plateau. And this collisional event is still ongoing. We still have the Indian subcontinent traveling towards the north at about several centimeters per year. So geologically speaking, it is a very fast speed. Therefore, that's why you have the Himalaya system as one of the most intensive places on planet where you have seismic activities and landslide, a lot of active geology is going on, okay? And note, there's an ocean, right? The Tethys Ocean, and this ocean finished. This ocean got closed in the course of the travel of India towards the north. So if we want to understand anything regarding this ancient ocean, we need to look for a rock record. As you can imagine, this rock record may not be that much, right? Because the entire ocean, several thousand kilometers, are all disappeared. All of the geological record, all of the rock record got squeezed within what the current day would be a narrow band of rocks preserved in the Himalayan and Tibetan Plateau system. So this is a tectonic map of the Tibetan Plateau. Southern part of the Tibetan Plateau is the Himalayan system. Each red line is what we refer as a suture. So each red line represents a collection of rock record that formed during the closure of a particular ocean. So the southernmost red line, southernmost suture, is referred to as Indus suture or Indus Yalung Sampu suture. It runs across from Pakistan, northwestern India, southern Tibetan Plateau, all the way to the border between India and Myanmar. So within this suture, again, this is a rich amount of geological information we can read regarding the past scenario of the Tethys Ocean. So I'm going to zoom in to the western part of the suture, western part of the Himalaya. Let's look at a geological map in this area. Okay, so this is a geological map. It's a very large scale geological map. There are several major units here. This purplish colored unit, Ladakh Range, this is a very high mountain at the present. It's a high mountain reaching over 6,000 meters in elevation. This is a mountain composed of granitic rocks. So it's a big piece of batholith. And to the south of this purple unit, it's a yellowish unit labeled as Indus Suture Zone. So Indus Suture Zone is what the suture zone I was talking about. This is a collection of rocks that all formed in that vast, several thousand kilometers wide ocean. But at the moment, all of the rock record got squeezed together into a narrow band of several tens of kilometers. So each layer in this collection of rocks is critical because there are something you can study and you can understand and you can, got a story out of that. So I'm going to zoom in, or not, sorry, I'm going to show you a cross section across this river valley. So this particular river flowing to the north is called Zanskar River. Zanskar River flows into Indus River. Indus River flows approximately from the east to the west. One of the major river system. This is actually its origin and a part of this Indus River. Okay, I'm going to show you a cross section across the Zanskar River Gorge, across the entire Indus Suture Zone. This cross section is going to be complicated, but I want to just show the first order structure of this collection of rocks, which is complicated. So these rocks, again, formed in a rich history, from a rich history of the Tethys Ocean. And at the moment, it got squeezed together, of course, because the collision is still ongoing. You have a lot of active faulting, thrusting, and all of the rock unit got busted up altogether. Okay, this is a wonderful area to do field work because there are always new outcrops. Each year you visit back because there's always some sort of road construction going on. And again, geologically speaking, it is a really rich collection of the Earth history that we do care about. We won't have a lot of time to talk about everything we do in this area. Today's talk is a story coming from the northern side of this system. Okay, come back to this geological map. Northern side of the Indus Suture is where you have the contact between the Indus Suture Zone and the Ladakh Range. So if we draw a topographic profile across this Ladakh Range, this is what you see. This is a swath profile taken from this boxed area. You can see this Ladakh range is high, around over 6,000 meters. And geologically, it is a big piece of batholith. It's a granite, yeah? And to the southern side of the Ladakh batholith, you have the Indus Suture Zone. And that particular unit close to the Ladakh batholith in the Indus Suture Zone is referred as the Indus Morass, right? And at two sides of the Ladakh range, southern side, you have Indus River, and the northern side, you have Shyok River flowing across this area. So now I'm going to bring you to the field. Imagine yourself standing here and looking towards the west. This is what you will see. This is the picture I showed you in the title slide. You have the batholith to the north, and you have clearly there are layered rocks. This is a collection of heavily deformed sedimentary rocks. Collectively, they are referred as the Indus Basin. Yeah, And the northern side of the Indus Basin, there's one unit called Indus Molasse. This is particularly important. There are a lot of debates regarding the origin of this unit because a lot of you would know that the term molasse refers to orogenic sedimentation. Right? If you find molasse, you are looking at a rising mountain that is shedding sediment and forming this collection of molasse. So we do want to understand when this molasse formed as a good indicator or constraint on when its sourcing mountain was uplifting. Now let's look at the batholiths. So this is one unit within a very large system. So before India collided with Eurasia, you have Tethys Ocean subducting beneath Eurasia, forming magmatic arc as what you would expect in the present day South America. Ladakh batholith is one of the key members within this trans-Himalayan magmatic arc. As you would know that if you have subduction going on, you will produce these melts that will eventually form batholiths or volcanic units, right? Whenever this arc formation terminated, that basically means you no longer have any more oceanic floor to subduct. That's a very good indicator saying perhaps when the collision took place, when you fully finish the subduction of that piece of ocean, right? Therefore, constraining the igneous activity of the Ladakh arc or Ladakh batholith has been one of the key topics in the geological research. For an arc, if you have melt generating at a depth and intruded subsurface, you will have a batholith. If you have the same melt erupted to the surface, you will have volcanic rocks, right? And the Ladakh arc, the extrusion part of the Ladakh arc is referred to as the Kadong volcanics. And its age is relatively well constrained. Actually, both the batholith and the Kadong volcanics, the age are relatively well constrained from 46 to 66 million years. Okay, now let's move on to the molasse. So this orogenic sedimentary unit, our knowledge regarding this molasse, we do have some fantastic studies several decades ago, but there's still a little bit debate simply because we are looking at such huge system with a lot of good exposures. The information we extract, and every single team could extract, are actually quite limited. So we think this molasse may, or previously we thought, this molasse formed around Eocene, and it carries signatures telling you that the sediments came from both India, south, and Eurasian to the north. Okay, I put question marks here because our new data suggested otherwise. Before we move on to look at new data, there are another important issue we need to solve, and that is the nature of contact between molasse and its neighboring unit in the Ladakh batholith. Because if there is a depositional contact, we could actually use the depositional age of the molasse to constrain the uplift and exhumation of this piece of mountain range. If it's a faulted contact, and then the story will be quite different. Previously, we actually also had debate on the nature of this contact in the literature. So just to summarize several questions we're interested here, we are interested in the molasse basin in terms of its formation age and its source regions and the contact between the molasse basin and the batholith. And we also care about the nature of the Ladakh batholith itself, or this part of the trans-Himalayan magmatic arc itself. And we want to know when igneous activity ceased. We also want to know when this magnificent topography uplifted. So more field photos. Exposure over there is fantastic. Everywhere you go, there are 1 kilometer of geology above you. This is one of the good exposure of the Ladakh of the sediments within the Ladakh area. This is an area called the Hemis village. You can see you can do a lot of work over there if you can spend the time, right? Good exposure, very well defined bedding, and this is a collection of continental facies rock. And other field photos. This is close to the village Hemis Shupichan. This is where this story is coming from. Again, a very good exposure, well-defined continental facies rocks. And this is the field photo across the Zanskar Gorge. So these rocks exposed along the Zanskar River are the rocks across the Indus suture zone. This is why I say every year we go there, there's new outcrop because road construction never stops. There's always a fresher rock exposed to the surface for us to look at. And these rocks are heavily deformed. These are relatively thinly bedded rocks. They are a collection of turbidites. You know, this is part of your ocean story here. We actually spent a lot of time, 2 field seasons, looking at these rocks. And there's a paleontologist here looking at fossil record within these rocks in the field. More photos looking at Zanskar River flowing towards north. Into the Indus River, and the amount of rocks you can see actually very much, too much in a way. And these rocks are not boring at all. They are diverse. They have continental facies, they have moraine facies, they have different colors even. This is a light purplish colored or reddish colored rock here, and black colored rock here. Right, so you never get bored looking at these rocks, only if they are only several tens of kilometers in width. And now let's move to the north, looking at the batholiths. Ladakh range is made of the Ladakh batholiths, granitic rock, typical granitic rock, forming a large mountain range. Another picture here, a granitic rock forming a large mountain range. If you need a scale, in this photo, you can pay attention to the upper part of this photo. There's a very enthusiastic student climbed all the way to the top of this mountain. This mountain actually goes way higher than what the photo shows. Huge batholiths got uplifted several thousand meters high. As I said, igneous activity would stop at some point forming this magmatic arc. As the hypothesis was, as India collided with Eurasia, you will have arc-type volcanic activity stopped. So we are also looking at those dikes in these big batholiths because these are also igneous activity. The question, of course, would be, are they the youngest phase of the arc formation activities, or are they representing something else after the collision? Yeah? What you need to do in such a system really is to take a multidisciplinary team, sedimentologist, geochronologist, paleontologist, and igneous petrologist, igneous geologist in this case, to unravel the rich history preserved in this area. Let's come back to the questions we care about. Hopefully I can answer as many of them as possible by this study. Okay, and let's go to the field. Let me show you what we did. We focused in an area, a southern side of the Ladakh range, where we can see both the molasse and the Ladakh range. Importantly, we also could see or we could look for the contact between the range, the batholiths, and the molasse over there to see, to verify what kind of contact really that is. Is that a depositional, a non-conformity, or it's a faulted contact? So that was the first thing we did. We made geological maps in this area, okay? As you can see, the red part is the Ladakh batholiths, and the green part are everything else. Here are sedimentary rocks. We were able to identify a thrust that is located away from the actual contact between the lowest unit, this brownish colored unit, and the red unit, the Ladakh batholith. So the answer to one of the questions, the nature of contact between these two units, we verified across several tens of kilometers. The contact would be a depositional contact. Right? So it's a depositional contact where you first form the eroded surface of this exhumed batholith, and then you put the sedimentary rocks on top of that. So this relationship is quite critical in forming our geological model, because this is what we regard as hard field evidence to show us that this batholith must first exhume to the surface and then receive deposition of this sediments. Therefore, constraining the depositional age of this collection of sediment becomes important when we try to understand when this batholith exhumed to the surface. Okay, that's what we did. The next, we logged sedimentary units from the basement or from the batholith all the way to the faulted contact. And we identify several sedimentary facies in this sedimentary column, M1, M2, M3, and M4. M1 is a coarse-grained conglomerate unit. Yeah? It contains a large size class, several meters. The lithology of these classes are all granitic rocks. They are plutonic rocks clearly derived from the eroding Ladakh batholith nearby. Right? That was the first impression we had, the first conclusion we had right there in the field. Oh, this piece of rock came from not very far away. Yeah, that makes sense because you have a batholith eroding to the surface. You have to dump those sediments somewhere, and the large grain size here really also tells you this piece didn't travel very far. Right? So it must source from somewhere close by. And more units, angular, large grain size, and crudely laminated. And you also have a fine-grained unit, mudstone to the top of this M1 facies. And you have the M3 facies, which contains dominantly volcanic class. So remember, the Ladakh batholiths, present day, as we see it, are full of plutonic rocks. They are crystalline, coarse-grained igneous rocks. But in this sedimentary unit, M3, we see dominantly 100% actually volcanic class. So the question will be where this volcanic unit came from. When we move up, you have M4 unit, relatively finer grain sized compared to the M1 unit, but still quite a lot of conglomerate layers. We did class counts to statistically show the abundance of class of different types within this sedimentary unit. We see a lot of granitic class, but after we did the counts, we found out actually the M1 unit and M4 unit are also dominated by volcanic units. Hence the question where these volcanic units came from. The first hypothesis was because this is an arc, you have now the plutonic component exposed to the surface. But before that, you must have a volcanic edifice sitting on top of that plutonic unit. Therefore, these volcanic class might be the extrusive part of the Ladakh arc, the Kardon volcanics. Okay. Further investigation also happened. We did a detrital zircon uranium lead dating. So zircon is a very good mineral. They form in igneous environments, but they got preserved primarily in igneous environment. They got preserved during sedimentary transportation, and got preserved in your sedimentary unit. They are durable, they are datable. You can use uranium and lead geochronology to date the formation age of these zircon grains. Okay, in sedimentary unit, when we date detrital zircons, it really provides us a very important constraint on the depositional age of this unit, because this grain of zircon need to form somewhere else first, and then got transported into your sedimentary basin. Therefore, if you're looking at this age spectrum, coming out of a sedimentary unit, we call it detrital zircon uranium lead age spectrum. You would say that the youngest age you discovered in your age spectrum would be no younger than the true depositional age of this rock. This provides a constraint on the maximum depositional age of the sedimentary unit you're looking at. So we know this cluster of grains, this cluster of ages are important. Therefore, we look at more using Concordia diagram. The calculated age is around 23 to 24 MA. Now, this provides a maximum depositional age for this unit. At the same time, there are macropaleontology data, their obstacle data, this recovered from the M2 unit, those fine grain unit, providing an age constraint Oligocene for the deposition of this unit. With our new radiometric data, which provide a maximum depositional age for this unit, we can now conclude that this unit actually formed in the latest Oligocene. So we've solved the age of this unit. The next step will be where exactly those sediment came from. The hypothesis or the observation indicated those granitic rock came from the Ladakh batholiths close by, and those volcanic rocks may came from the Kardon volcanics, as you know, the extrusive portion of the Ladakh range. The next set of data is detrital zircon hafnium isotopes. So hafnium isotope, you can think hafnium isotope carries a signature telling you the nature of the melt that formed those zircons. Depending on the proportion between mantle and crustal derived melts, you can have different, this notation here is epsilon hafnium, different epsilon hafnium unit. Basically, if they are clustered together, they would come from the same type of melts originally formed. We see that all of the slightly older grains characterized by positive hafnium isotopes, whereas the youngest population, the youngest grain are characterized by negative hafnium isotope values. When we compare existing data from our regional scale, these are data compiled from igneous unit across this whole area, we noted that our youngest detrital zircon population fit very well in terms of the epsilon hafnium value with the Karakoram batholiths, right? Leading us to favor that these Karakoram batholiths may serve as a source of this sediment. And the question is where these rocks are now. They are actually further to the north, outside of this mapped area. Okay. To summarize, we're able to determine the depositional age of the Indus morass basin with the observation that this piece of morass deposited on top of the eroded batholiths directly. We know that this batholith must have been exhumed to the surface at this time, right? And with provenance analysis, with the analysis on where this sediment came from, we suggest that they came from the Ladakh batholiths to the Kardon volcanic rocks. Present day, they are located northern side of the range, and the Karakoram batholiths even further to the north. And this really leads us to a scenario that when the Molasse Basin first deposited, these huge landscape may not be there because this topographic burial, if they exist at that time, will make it very difficult for anything further to the north transported to the southern side, right? So this is a sort of a secondary interpretation we can draw from this data set that maybe this large piece of mountain range was uplifted after this age, okay? But this is only part of the story because we're looking at a system where we have a mountain and a basin, right? This mountain is rising, uplifting, shedding sediment, and dumping all of the sediments into the basin, right? And the next, what we really want to look at would be, okay, so we got some story out of the sedimentary unit. What will this story still holds if we investigate data from this eroding landscape, this mountain part of this mountain and basin system? We're looking at this system like this, right? You have a mountain's uplifting, shedding sediments, and then those sediments got dumped into the sedimentary basin, and this sedimentary basin are being destructed because of the ongoing collision. And you can imagine a particle or a rock originally might sit very deep into the core of the mountain and then got transported to the surface and then transported to the sedimentary basin and then had its own story, own history in the basin, got buried and exhumed to the surface, right? If we want to understand this pathway, if we want to understand the story, the history of those rocks, one aspect we could do actually would be to measure the temperature history of the rock if we can. A rock deeper in a mountain system will be hot. As they exhumed, transported to the surface, it would cool down. And if it got transported into the sedimentary basin, burial heating would increase its temperature again. And then eventually it would cool down to the surface temperature, right? This brings up a collection of methods we call low temperature thermochronology. It is different from geochronology, where you can date using this method, date the rocks, and get an absolute formation age of those rocks. Thermochronology instead refer or can tell you the thermal history of the rock. So the ages you get from thermochronology are not the absolute formation age of a rock, rather are age or time spent since that rock cooled through those closure temperatures. And there are two popular minerals, apatite and zircon, and there are two popular isotopic systems, uranium, thorium, helium, and fission track systems. So we have four wonderful thermochronometers we can apply on different types of rocks and to decipher the thermal history of those rocks. So just several slides on how exactly this method would work. In terms of uranium, thorium, helium, a uranium would decay eventually to lead, right? If you measure uranium and lead, you would use uranium-lead geochronology. That tells you the formation of that rock, right? But note that in this long decay chain, there are a lot of alpha decay. Each alpha decay is a decay that the parent isotope would emit one alpha particle, a helium-4, right? Therefore, during this system, you have a huge amount of helium particles, or helium atoms accumulated in your mineral system. Under high temperature, because of diffusion, because helium is a light noble gas, all of the helium would not be preserved in the crystal because of, they would escape, right? And only after you cool this system, after its corresponding closure temperature, you start to retain all of the helium produced in your system, right? And now if you measure the amount of helium and you measure amount of parent isotopes in your system, you can get an age. Again, it's a thermochron age. It tells you the amount of time when or since when this particular mineral grain passed through that closure temperature, okay? Similarly, a fission track is also a product that you would expect from uranium to lead, right? It's just a very rare decay event comparing to alpha decay. So about one fission event or spontaneous fission event would occur in every 2 million alpha decay. So the amount of fission you're looking at from spontaneous fission decay are very rare, right? It would only happen when you have a heavy parent isotope. Uranium-238 is a perfect isotope that would undergo spontaneous fission. Similarly to helium, this damage, so when spontaneous fission takes place, you will leave a damage, a fission track in your crystal, and this fission track would heal under high temperature. So all of the spontaneous fission product will no longer be recorded if you are sitting at high temperature. When your system passes through a lower temperature range, these tracks will be preserved, okay? So because spontaneous fission event is very rare compared to alpha decay, we can actually see the products under microscope. So these are 2 grains of minerals, zircon and apatite. These are tracks, these features are all tracks. So each one represents a spontaneous decay event. If you want to figure out how many spontaneous fission events, you just need to count them, how many tracks you see from a mineral system. With the modern system setup, it is actually a rather straightforward task to do. Now, more pictures on fission tracks. I'm quite enthusiastic about this method because it's what I do at UQ. These is reflective light of an apatite grain. You have all of the tracks intersecting with a polished surface, right? Note the scale here. This is only several tens of micron, small, reasonable or normal grain size. If you change this to transmitted light, this all of the tracks, because tracks have a finite length. Therefore, if you focus down, you can actually see the termination of these tracks. This is how we count them. We just count them under a microscope. Then figure out the age of the fission tracks system. Okay. So you can get a thermochron age of apatite fission track system. Note that each track has a length, right? Therefore, there's a unique second aspect of this method, apatite fission track, that you can actually measure the length of the tracks. And this length tells you something independent from its age. This is a graph. Horizontal axis is temperature. Imagine this might be a borehole. As you drill down, the temperature goes higher and higher. And the measured fission track age would be consistent in its low temperature range of this borehole, but decrease significantly and eventually into 0. Everything heals at a high temperature. You're looking at a partial annealing zone here where you have partially preserved these tracks. These can also be seen in the track length. As you enter into this partial annealing zone, the length would reduce, not immediately to 0, but gradually to 0. Right? Therefore, we can actually use the distribution of track length to tell us what possible thermal history we're looking at in particular rock samples. And these are several typical track length distribution. For example, if you have a fast cooling rock, number 5 here, you would have a track length distribution dominantly by long track length because everything passed through this partial annealing zone very quickly. There's not much time for smaller tracks, for shorter tracks to accumulate. Another interesting path will be path 6. You have a scenario where you have a sedimentary basin forming and basin burial lead to the heating of particular rocks. Maybe it's your source rock, right? And then eventually this cooled to the surface. In the end, this path will give you what we call a bimodal track length distribution, very indicative for a reheating of particular samples. Okay. Now, what we find in our data in Ladakh, because remember, we want to corroborate the problem, the story we made out of those sedimentary rocks, right? Let's look at a map in this area. This map will be slightly rotated. This is north. Because this range is important, it's one of the key mountain range in the Himalaya system. And it has this wonderful lithology, granite, which considers to be the best lithology you can use to perform low temperature thermochronology. There are quite a lot of data being collected over the years. Of course, we collected additional data coming from a data blind area. So let's look at a cross-section, data cross-section across this area. From south to the north, you have a decreasing trend of these ages, telling you that the northern part might be exhumed relatively recent compared to the southern part of this range. Basically, this shows a tilting towards the south scenario for the exhumation of Ladakh batholiths, right? And our additional data coming from the southern side of this mountain range, and our additional data indicate that this story may not be that simple. This is our data. We have, this is data plotted along strike along the southern side of the Ladakh range. You have zircon fission track ages around 50 MA. Then you have quite a range of epitite fission track ages ranging from 30 something to 22 MA. And then you have a bunch of epitite uranium, thorium, helium ages younger than epitite fission track ages, which would make sense because epitite uranium, thorium, helium system has a lower closure temperature, right? This is one of the epitite fission track data. What really interesting here is the presence of these shorter tracks or shortened tracks. This provides a clue that this sample might be heated, right? So how we can further investigate into this data, the current approach is we conduct modeling of thermochron ages to inverse for a plausible thermal history that would fit the observed data. So this is one of the thermal histories we modeled based on our data. You have a rock formed under high temperature and then exhumed to the surface because we know that, again, from geological constraint, Ladakh batholith is exhumed to the surface by 33, 34 MA. And then the model explored itself and provide this finer details of the thermal history for Ladakh batholith, telling us this after the basin formed, the basement of this molasse basin, the eroded surface of Ladakh batholith got buried to almost 100 degrees, corresponding to several kilometers, and then exhumed to the surface after 20 million years ago. Okay, so this finer detail actually raises a lot of questions. Why so this timing here, this second phase of cooling, what exactly was the cause of that? Are you looking at a younger event of this mountain building history or something else? Okay. So that was more like a question than an answer. Yeah. As for many of our ongoing research, we've get answers, but most times we got more questions that we need to answer in the future. So what we know so far, we were able to clarify and revise the age for the formation of the Indus-Molasse Basin. It's the latest Oligocene, and its source are really exclusively coming from the north. We haven't observed any evidence indicating the Indian portion become a contributor for the sediment source in this particular area, right? And of course, these observations indicate a depositional contact between the molasse and the batholiths. And the next answer I could provide here will be the uplift of this range might be younger than we thought before. Yeah? It might be younger than Miocene or even later because of this second cooling history we're looking at. And there must be an explanation for that. Hopefully I can answer in the future. In the future, what we are doing, what we are planning on doing, and this is also what we're doing right now, we want to further clarify the uplift history of this mountain range, because everything we measure so far with thermochronology are called exhumation. It tells you when this rock or how this rock approached the Earth's surface. But we didn't really really explore was what the surface uplift, what's the absolute elevation change in this area, which may differ from the exhumation history you're looking at. This is actually a challenge question to answer in any orogenic system, the absolute surface elevation change. And of course, the second cooling, we need to figure out what that's for. Is this related to a different episode of exhumation or some structural event within this Indus Basin? And of course, we're looking at an important arc. When this arc terminated, would be something we keep exploring in the future. Okay, so with this, I think I can finish, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Okay, so we'll do two different things. Okay. Two different things here, because I forgot to mention to people that there's you can type your questions into the Q&A if you're online, and I'll sort of curate those questions and pass them on so Renjie can answer them. And also, obviously, if there are any questions in the audience, so we can see who's asked the question online. But if there are questions in the audience, just say who you are and then ask away. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Thanks, Renjie. That's positively fascinating. It's great to see. Thanks. I guess my question is a little slightly off your topic. I was intrigued by that diagram or video you showed first up with India moving from off the coast of Western Australia up to intersect Eurasia in a very quick period. So in that type of setting with the north-directed subduction, we're obviously looking at the arc now. Do we see in this neck of the world any back arc settings related to all of this activity?
Yeah. So there are back arc settings if you're looking for back arc, obviously you need to look in the interior of Tibet. Yeah? But the problem over there is the exposure, or rather the access, because it's a very high elevation area. But geologically speaking, the the later event kind of make it very difficult to look for the arc. In this particular area, Ladakh, we actually don't see there's a back arc because the northern part will be the Karakoram bathyllus and Shyok suture that dominantly record the earlier history, the earlier episode of suturing. So I'm not sure if that really answered your question. Yeah, if there are any, yeah.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Jenna. I really love all the fish and track work, giant fish and track nerd. I was wondering if with the granites especially, if there's been any argon work done just to kind of corroborate the ages between them.
Yeah, there are, but on top of my head, I couldn't remember the ages, but it would be slightly older than the fish and track ages, yeah. But I might have to double check and come back to you. Mm. Yeah, there are works, argon works from the UCLA group or ANU group. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions from online as well. So the first one, thanks Renjie for the good presentation. I noticed the Indus molasse is dominated by conglomerates. I wonder what was the basin type of this molasse, foreland or just a fault-bounded basin?
It's referred to as a molasse basin, so it's an intermontane basin, continental facies. Yeah, hopefully that sort of answered it.
And I'll just ask the other one too. Mm-hmm. There was also a question, so what's your evidence for the depositional contact with the batholith?
Yep, so the evidence was actually a straightforward evidence. It was a field observation. But you have to sort of look for the right location. So what we did in the field was kind of travel across along strike and look from the granitic part and all the way to the south to the sediments. And of course, whenever we see a contact, we had that debate in the field whether this is faulted or depositional. And in the end, the consensus across many observation points was that it was a depositional contact. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Any other questions from the audience? I had one, or it's sort of I know from our conversations that you're in the process of or made a lot of progress in building your own lab here. And it's been years and years since I've had much of anything to do with, well, I've never done any myself, but I've sort of witnessed people doing appetite fish and track work. And I seem to remember that we had, when I was at Monash, we had quite a few people who were actually, sort of manually counting them. Have we made a lot of progress in that area? Is it all done in an automated way these days?
Excellent. And we do, as a community, we have an automated system. Right? And this system has made our life way easier because it digitally archive everything, digitally capture everything, and it provided a mechanism or platform to automatically count everything for you. But in the end, each fish and track lab would have a protocol in quality checking. Usually that would involve a actual human count to check all of the automatically counted results from the system. Because this is kind of a learning process. We contribute in the development of the system, the method. We also want to ensure the data production is solid. I guess to answer your question is we have a much better system now than 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The efficiency and the reliability and really the record for fish and track data production are much better. It's like every other method, the trajectory is always positive.
And you said that there's a better protocol now in terms of working back and forth between human and automated things. I know that with a lot of other geochemical work, there's quite a well-defined set of standards, repeats, and all that sort of thing to absolutely ensure that.
We do have protocol on, first of all, training the analyst and also to check every batch of data. So that would involve blind count several standards to make sure the standard ages are correct. What really fascinates, I think, about fission track is the level of human involvement. So each time you look under the microscope, you ask the question, is this a track? Is this a non-track feature, dislocation, for example? And why this grain looks like this? Is this sample igneous? What kind of history the sample might be? So this intimacy between a researcher and a sample in fission track really is unparalleled in, I think, in all of the analytical world, because this, human brain involvement. In a way, I would always think if you got fission track data from a highly reputed lab, and this data quality would be, top of all other data you might get. Yeah, that just maybe a little bias here. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've just about hit the hour. So look, I'd just like to thank you once again for
having me.
coming, giving a presentation, and look forward to keeping in touch over the next little while. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.